Hello and welcome back, and that is right, today I want to talk about this. This is the Addlink D60 SSD for NAS systems. That is right. We've talked about SSDs here on the channel a lot now. We've talked about NAS systems a lot here on the channels. But you know what? There isn't actually that many SSDs in the market targeted towards NAS systems. There's going to be users out there that go, well, that's because all SSDs are the same, dickhead, get out. I get it. But much like there are hard drives in the market that are better suited to different operations, like surveillance drives that prioritize write operations more than they do read. Green drives that are designed to be very, kind of resource lower usage. In the same way, NAS system drives are designed to be on for days, weeks, months, and years at a time. In the hard drive world, when it comes to the SSD world, SSDs have a similar array of particular attributes that make them better suited to network attached storage use than others. Now, this D60 drive here from Addlink is available in a 1TB and 2TB framework. I say 1 and 2TB, it's actually 960 gigabytes and 1920 gigabytes. And that's because of something called over provisioning, where an area of the storage is actually utilized for additional performance as kind of a buffer zone on the drive via the NANDs there. Now, in the market right now, there's only really, in terms of kind of domestic NAS, there are only two NAS SSDs in the market. There's the WD Red series of SSDs, the SA500 and the SN700 there, and Seagate's Iron Wolf range of drives. This is trying to challenge both of them. And Addlink is not a big name in the SSD world. They're known, and I've talked about them on the channel a lot, but not many people else have. And ultimately, what makes this stand out? What on earth are they bringing to the party that doesn't already exist there? What about pricing? Well, the 1TB drive rocks around for $129 right now. I could see the pricing online. And $224 or $224.99 for the 2TB model. But I will say that is more expensive than the WD drives in the market. So it's already put it slightly behind WD already. And WD, everyone knows who they are. I will say though, with Seagate's range of M.2 NVMe's for NAS, the Iron Wolf drives have always been kind of hard to come by. And although they are in the market, they're nowhere near as uniform and as available as their hard drive range of series. Now, what makes this stand out from the existing range of SSDs, not only that are used in NAS, but NAS specialized SSDs, are the following. Number one, it is a NAS SSD in Gen 4 architecture. All of WD's entries there are either Gen 3 M2 NVMe or are SATA based. This is available in SATA in the D20 series, but this is a Gen 4 SSD, opening up the additional bandwidth there. And as more and more systems are rocking out the gate with 12th, 13th and 14th generation Intel processors there, we're seeing a lot more of the AMD Ryzen series rocking out with Gen 4 PCI lanes. And hell, even the older Lake series of CPUs starting to open the doors a little bit there towards Gen 4 architecture. The result is that this M2 NVMe is able to take advantage of the larger bandwidth afforded to the lanes in those systems, and therefore increases the performance. But the next thing it brings there, moving away from performance, is endurance, because that's the other big thing that any SSD for NAS needs to provide. Now, generally this is measured in two different factors, TBW, terabytes written, or drive writes per day. Terabytes written will vary depending on the capacity of the drive in question, but drive writes per day is ultimately how much of the capacity of this drive can be written fresh every single day, and the drive still maintain all of its performance and abilities that the manufacturers state. And WD's entry in WD Red series is 0.3 to 0.38 drive writes per day. That's 380 gig over every terabyte. Seagate and their Iron Wolf drive there has a 0.7 drive writes per day rating there. So again, that's around 700 gigabytes, give or take, out of a terabyte. This has a 1 drive per day, drive write per day, DWPD. That means this 1TB drive can have 1TB of data written onto it every single day, and it will still maintain the operational parameters that they suggest. That's the MTBF, that is the endurance factor, that is living with its warranty and hardware lifespan, and of course the performance up and down. That is impressive. Yes, it's more expensive, but there are very few M2 NVMe's in Gen 4 that have a 1 DWPD rating. The next thing this drive has is PLP, power loss protection. This is a very enterprise grade requirement. Power loss protection, or PLP, involves this drive having several little capacitors either side, and there's 4 on either side of the drive. Hopefully you're seeing it there on screen. Those individual capacitors store a small amount of power. This means in the event that your system powers down unexpectedly, power cut, etc., it provides valuable milliseconds, not seconds or minutes, milliseconds, to complete the existing block write operation. Now you may be thinking, who cares? It's such a small amount of data and it's such a small amount of time, it doesn't make a difference. That's why you're not enterprise, my friend, because that means that if you are writing lots of data and it gets interrupted and then it resumes later on, that bit of data that's carried over does not have an inconsistency. Now, you might not notice that inconsistency today, but if it's part of a larger subset, if it's part of a whole chart of data, an XLS or something, that inconsistency can mean real money. PLP built onto this drive. So we've got PLP, we've got 1.0 drive writes per day. What else have we got? Well, the NAND on board is 3D TLC. It's coaxial NAND as well. So it's not even cheap NAND. I've looked online. It's good quality NAND, and it's eTLC NAND there. That is a higher quality of NAND operation there with better error correction on board. Again, an enterprise grade NAND on an enterprise grade SSD with PLP and a high drive write per day. This is the sort of thing we see at data center level. And this is a drive rocking out for systems like these. That's what I mean about this being a different kind of NAS SSD. Now, there is a third capacity. You can get it as low as 500 gig, but I couldn't find any pricing on that. But the reason I bring up the 500 gig model is we've got to talk about performance on this. Now, the rated performance on this, in terms of read performance, is 6,000 megabytes per second by the manufacturer themselves, and that is on the 500, the 1TB, and the 2TB model there. Slightly less than the 7,000 megs per second Gen 4 SSDs are actually generally able to achieve, and I assume part of that is to do with that NAND in question and the error correction checking that's happening with the data during the data transmitting to it, and the checks either way. But more importantly, and there is encryption there too, I will add the write operation on this is absolute DS. It is not good. Now, that shouldn't come as a surprise, because much like we mentioned earlier on with different drives being tailored to certain kind of usage environments, when we were talking about surveillance drives having a heavier write operational factor than they do read, this is obviously focusing on caching. This is not a drive for storage pools. This is for caching first and foremost. On the 500 gig, it only has a write performance of 700 megabytes per second. The 1TB at 1400 megabytes per second and 2000 megabytes per second on the 2TB. This is the 1TB model there. In terms of traditional storage pool use, this is going to be crap, but in terms of caching, it's not so bad, because when you are writing to this in write caching, you're actually moving data onto the drive, which then moves over to the slower hard drives there. How does that compare with WD Red's offering? WD Red, the SN700 WD Red NAS SSD is a Gen 3 drive, but it is 3000 megs over 3000 megs, so it's a much slower and lower read performance, but it has a higher write performance. And bear in mind, that's a Gen 3 system, so if you use this in a Gen 3 system, things scale down. It is backwards compatible, Gen 4 to 3 to 2, etc. But once that scales down, you're missing out something. The Iron Wolf drive was also utilising a Gen 4 controller, the Phison E16 controller, which was able to achieve 5,000 megabytes per second. So this has a higher read and a similar write. This takes advantage of the Phison E18 controller, very, very common among Gen 4 SSDs, and that combined with 4 nuggets of NAND that make up this drive. Again, this is the 1TB, so each one of those is 256 gig of the 4, 2 at the top, 2 at the back, means there's a decent amount of data distribution, and therefore the write operation, although not great, it's still not too shabby for a caching drive, and the write is still very, very good. Next up, let's talk about performance. I took the D60 SSD here, installed it inside my Minis Forum MS01, then went ahead and ran Unraid via USB on that system, went into the Unraid terminal, and then via SSH executed some read and write operations. Now, the write operations for a drive that is rated at 1400 megabytes per second, this comfortably achieved 1.6 gigabytes per second throughout my testing. I did 60 individual 1 gigabyte test file operations, but I will say around halfway through, after about 28 seconds, then it started to dip lower than that, and it eventually went as low as 1 gig to 500 megabytes per second. That was an oversaturation of the cache on board this drive. Again, still pretty good, but given it is a 1600 megabytes per second operation there, oversaturation was largely inevitable. Now, read ops, absolutely fine. We saw this drive hitting 6.2 gigabytes per second consistently, and that was over the course of 60 individual 1 gigabyte test files. Now, to take a quick break in the middle there, I will say in terms of drive temperature, when I did have this drive set up in the Minis forum, I made a point of not having any cooling. I just wanted to see how the drive would operate on its own, as different NAS systems have different cooling measures, and I wanted to get a baseline. Now, the drive itself went up to 71 degrees during the course of the 61 gigabyte write operations on that drive. After around 1 minute, it went down to around 62, 63, and after 2 minutes, it went down to 60 degrees. So again, very acceptable numbers for an SSD there, nothing really too shabby. The next thing I did was get hold of 2 of these SSDs and pop them inside a Synology NAS. More precisely, it was a DS423 Plus. I wanted to test several things. The first thing I wanted to test, of course, was compatibility. And when I put these drives inside the Synology system, it recognized the drives in there. And the first thing I wanted to do was go ahead and then see if I could create a storage pool. Unsurprisingly, because of Synology software, it would not allow me to create a storage pool on these drives, because Synology's latest version of DSM only allows these drives to be used as caching, and only their own drives can be used as pools. But I can confirm that when I installed it inside QNAP TS264, installed it inside Ugreen DXP480, installed it inside the SSD flash store, installed it inside the TerraMaster F4424, all of those systems recognised it and allowed me to use 2 of these drives for both pools and for caching. But when I went ahead and took these drives and used it within caching on the Synology NAS, it allowed me to create a read-write caching pool. Yes, it spat a notification and a warning at me about the compatibility list, but again, Synology is very strict about the compatibility. Ultimately, this drive worked an absolute treat in those bays and was recognised immediately. Now, I would have had to have ran this drive for weeks, if not months, to really get a grip on just how good it would be at caching, but as a general performance drive, it worked a treat. It's very hard to test PLP settings, but PLP was picked up when I went into the architecture of this drive in the Unraid terminal, alongside that recognising that it was indeed that Gen 4x4 drive. Ultimately, as an SSD for NAS goes, if their claims on the durability, their claims on the PLP support and the activity on that, and of course the performance this drive can put out are accurate, this is one of the best SSDs I've seen in the market for NAS. Unfortunately, with any SSD that is designed for NAS and particularly caching, the proof in the pudding is going to be for months. So we're going to be running these 2 drives inside a Synology DS923 for the next 3 months during the background test of other videos. Watch out for them there in the background. We're just going to double check if these drives are running fine. If you don't hear anything from me on this, it means they did their job, because I'm not going to make a video where I go, these drives worked, the end. But if we encounter any problems, stay tuned for that video when it comes out. But apart from that, based on everything I've seen during our testing and everything that the brand has told us, this is a damn fine drive for NAS. And although it's a pinch more expensive than some options in the market, there's a lot worse out there as well, and this brings you enterprise-grade features at a price point that I would argue is a great deal more consumer. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. There should be an article linked in the description below over on NAS Compares, where we'll be updating that with further testing on these drives as it arrives. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. There's links in the description to get hold of these from different retailers, and if you're going to go to those shops anyway, and the video helped you, if those 2 things are true, use those links. It really helped us out, so we get a small commission. This goes directly back into everything we do. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.